The night shift had always been quiet for Ben Carter, a 57-year-old janitor working at Greenwood Elementary School. The long, empty hallways, the soft hum of vending machines, and the faint scent of chalk and disinfectant were all too familiar to him. He had spent nearly 2 decades cleaning classrooms, wiping down desks, and ensuring that every morning the school was spotless before the children arrived. Ben wasn't the kind of man people noticed. Teachers barely acknowledged him, students hurried past him without a second glance, and the principal only spoke to him when there was a complaint. He had long accepted that he was just another invisible worker in the background of other people's lives. But something about that night was different. As he mopped the floor near room 102, his tired eyes spotted a small, tattered teddy bear lying beneath one of the desks. The bear had one missing button eye, faded brown fur, and a blue ribbon tied around its neck. It was old, well-loved, and clearly important to someone. Ben bent down, picked up the teddy bear, and examined it closely. It reminded him of a stuffed toy his late daughter, Emily, used to carry everywhere before she passed away years ago. A deep ache filled his chest as memories of her flooded his mind. Her laughter, the way she hugged her favorite toy at night, and how she once said, "Daddy, my teddy keeps me safe." Shaking off the sadness, Ben turned the bear over and found a name written on its tag. Charlie. His thoughts snapped back to reality. This must belong to one of the kids, but who? Ben sighed, unsure of what to do. Most lost items ended up in the school's lost and found box, but something told him this teddy bear was different. A part of him wanted to just toss it in the box and move on. But another part, the part that still held onto memories of his daughter, couldn't ignore the feeling that this toy was special. Little did he know, this small decision would change his life forever. Ben placed the teddy bear on his cleaning cart, glancing at it occasionally as he continued his shift. The school was eerily quiet at night, just the way he liked it. It gave him time to think, away from the noise of the world that often made him feel like he didn't belong. As he walked down the hallway, his mind drifted to his daughter, Emily. She had been his world, his little girl who would run into his arms every evening when he got home from work. But fate had been cruel. She had fallen ill when she was only 7, and despite all the treatments and hospital visits, she never recovered. After losing Emily, Ben's life had fallen apart. His marriage crumbled under the weight of grief, and soon, his wife left, unable to cope with the pain. He had no one left, no family, no close friends, just his job at the school, where he could lose himself in routine and avoid facing the emptiness of his life. But tonight, holding Charlie the teddy bear stirred something in him. He wondered about the child who had lost it. Were they heartbroken? Were they lying in bed, unable to sleep without their precious stuffed friend? Determined to find out, he decided he would not simply leave the bear in the lost and found box. He would return it personally. The next morning, as the students began arriving, Ben stood near the main hallway, observing them. He knew most of them by face, but not by name. That was just how things were. No one really spoke to the janitor unless they needed something cleaned. Then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 6, stood near her teacher, Ms. Reynolds, with tears streaming down her face. Her small hands clutched the straps of her pink backpack, and she looked around the hallway frantically, searching for something. Ben didn't need to ask. He knew. Approaching cautiously, he held up the teddy bear. Looking for this? The moment the girl's eyes landed on Charlie, her face lit up with pure joy. She gasped, covering her mouth with her tiny hands before running straight to him. "Charlie," she cried, reaching for the bear. Ben knelt down and gently placed it in her hands. "I found him last night in your classroom," he said with a small smile. "He must have been hiding under your desk." The little girl hugged the bear tightly, whispering something to it before looking up at Ben with teary but happy eyes. "Thank you, mister," she said softly. Ms. Reynolds smiled warmly. "Ben, this is Lily Parker. She was heartbroken when she lost her teddy bear yesterday. She wouldn't even eat dinner last night, said she couldn't sleep without him." Ben's heart clenched. He knew exactly how that felt. "Charlie keeps me safe," Lily added, echoing the same words his daughter had once told him. Something deep inside Ben cracked, but for the first time in years, it wasn't painful. Instead, it felt warm. Ms. Reynolds patted Lily's back. "What do we say to Mr. Carter?" Lily turned back to Ben with a big, bright smile. "You're a hero." Ben chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, I'm just the janitor." But as Lily hugged her teddy bear tightly, beaming up at him, Ben realized that, for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. He had no idea that this small act of kindness was about to bring something unexpected into his life. That night, Ben sat in his small apartment, staring at the old photo on his nightstand. Emily's face smiled back at him, her tiny arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere. The memory of her laughter echoed in his mind, warm yet distant, like sunlight struggling to reach the depths of the ocean. Finding Lily's teddy bear had stirred something inside him. For years, he had convinced himself that he was just drifting through life, doing his job, going through the motions. But today, he had made a difference, even if it was something as small as returning a lost toy. And Lily's words kept replaying in his mind. "You're a hero." Ben shook his head, chuckling to himself. If only she knew. Heroes weren't janitors with calloused hands and broken hearts. Still, he couldn't deny that something had changed. He had felt alive today, truly alive, for the first time since he lost Emily. The next morning, as Ben pushed his cleaning cart through the hallways, he noticed something unusual. Students were smiling at him. Normally, the kids walked past without a second glance. But today, several of them waved. "Morning, Mr. Carter," one boy called out. "Hi, Mr. Ben," a girl said, beaming. Ben nodded back, confused. Since when did they know his name? Then, Ms. Reynolds approached him with a knowing smile. "Word got around about what you did for Lily," she said. "Turns out, the kids think you're something of a guardian angel now." Ben laughed. "For finding a teddy bear?" She shrugged. To them, that wasn't just a teddy bear. It was proof that someone cared. Her words struck him deep. Later that day, while cleaning near the playground, Ben felt a small tug on his sleeve. He turned to find Lily looking up at him, her teddy bear clutched tightly in one arm. "Hi, Mr. Ben," she said shyly. "Hey, kiddo," he replied, kneeling to her level. "Charlie staying out of trouble?" She giggled. "Yeah, but I wanted to give you something." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, handmade card. On the front, there was a crayon drawing of a man holding a broom with a bright yellow cape. Above it, in wobbly letters, she had written, "To Mr. Ben, my hero." Ben's throat tightened. He stared at the drawing for a long moment before looking back at Lily. "No one's ever drawn me with a cape before," he said, voice thick with emotion. She grinned. "That's 'cause you never wore one before. But you should. You help people, even when they don't see it." Ben didn't know what to say. For so long, he had felt invisible. But this little girl saw him. And somehow, that made all the difference. That night, Ben sat in his small apartment, staring at the crayon drawing Lily had given him. His rough, work-worn hands traced over the bright yellow cape she had drawn, as if the strokes of waxy color could somehow give him the strength he had lost years ago. He had been just a janitor for so long, at least, that's what he told himself. But today, for the first time in years, he had felt seen. Not as someone cleaning floors, but as someone who mattered. The thought wouldn't leave him. The next day, Ben arrived early to work, still carrying the feeling of Lily's words in his heart. As he walked into the main hall, he noticed a group of students sitting on the floor, looking nervous. Their teacher, Miss Taylor, was kneeling beside them, her face filled with concern. "What's going on?" Ben asked. Miss Taylor sighed. "It's Jason. He has an important presentation today, but he's too scared to do it. He's been struggling with confidence for a while." Ben looked at Jason, a quiet boy with glasses who was staring at his shoes, his hands clenched into fists. The other kids whispered around him. Something about the boy's defeated expression reminded Ben of himself after he lost Emily, that feeling of being powerless. Ben stepped forward. "Hey, Jason," he said gently. "You ever heard the story of the little girl who thought she lost her best friend, but a janitor helped her find it?" Jason looked up, curious. No. Ben smiled. Well, there's a reason people call me a hero around here. But you know what? I used to be afraid too. Afraid that nothing I did mattered. That I wasn't good enough. Jason's eyes widened. Really? But you're not scared of anything. Ben chuckled. I used to be. But then I learned something important. He knelt down so he was at eye level with Jason. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do something anyway, even when you are. Jason hesitated. But what if I mess up? Ben grinned. Then you try again. That's how heroes do it. The room was silent. The kids around them were watching intently. Finally, Jason took a deep breath. Okay, he whispered. I'll try. Ms. Taylor gave Ben a grateful smile as Jason stood up, his shoulders a little straighter than before. And for the first time in a long time, Ben felt purpose burning in his chest. As the weeks passed, something unexpected started happening. Ben wasn't just the janitor anymore. The kids sought him out. They waved when they saw him. Some asked for advice. Others simply told him about their day. Even the teachers noticed the change. Ms. Reynolds stopped him one afternoon, a thoughtful expression on her face. Ben, have you ever considered working with kids in a bigger way? She asked. Ben blinked. What do you mean? Well, she said, you have a way of connecting with them. They trust you. Maybe you could do more mentoring, coaching, something beyond just keeping the school clean. Ben frowned. I don't know. I mean, I never went to college, never got a degree. I wouldn't even know where to start. Ms. Reynolds smiled. You don't need a degree to change lives. You're already doing it. Her words lingered in his mind for days. Could he really do something more? For so long, he had told himself that his life had stopped the day Emily died. But maybe he had been wrong. One afternoon, Ben was cleaning outside near the playground when Lily ran up to him, breathless and excited. Mr. Ben. Mr. Ben, she shouted, waving something in her hand. He turned, surprised. Whoa, slow down, kiddo. What's going on? She grinned. I wrote about you for my school project. She handed him a neatly stapled paper with a title written in big, careful letters. My real-life superhero. Ben's heart pounded as he read the first few lines. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear work uniforms and carry brooms. My hero is Mr. Ben because he always makes people feel safe and happy. He helped me when I was sad, and he helps everyone in our school. He makes things better just by being here. Ben had to stop. His vision blurred. He had spent years believing he had nothing left to give, that his best days were behind him. But standing here, reading Lily's words, he realized something life-changing. He had been wrong. His life wasn't over. He still had more to give. And maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't finished yet. Ben sat alone in the school's janitor's closet, staring at Lily's paper. The words, my real-life superhero, kept echoing in his mind. He had spent so many years in the shadows, believing his life had lost its meaning. But these kids, Lily, Jason, all of them, they saw something in him that he had forgotten about himself. But could he really be more than just a janitor? The thought both excited and terrified him. That evening, Ben made a decision. He pulled out an old, dusty notebook from a box in his apartment. It was something he hadn't looked at in years, his old teaching certification course materials. Before his world fell apart, he had dreamed of working with kids. He had started taking classes, but never finished. When Emily got sick, everything else had become secondary. Now, for the first time in over a decade, he flipped through the pages. The notes, the lessons, it was all still there, buried under years of grief. Maybe it was time to try again. The next day, Ben approached Ms. Reynolds, the teacher who had suggested he do more. Hey, can I ask you something? He said, shifting uncomfortably. Do you think it's too late for someone like me to start over? Ms. Reynolds smiled. Ben, you've already started over. You just didn't realize it. He exhaled. I never finished my teaching certification, but I was thinking maybe I should. Her smile grew. You absolutely should. Ben hesitated. I don't know where to begin. Ms. Reynolds thought for a moment. The district offers a night program for PAR educators. It helps school staff transition into teaching roles. It's part-time and flexible. I think you'd be perfect for it. Ben felt a spark of hope. You really think I could do it? She nodded. Ben, you're already teaching these kids every day. The only difference is, now you'll have the paperwork to prove it. For the first time in years, Ben allowed himself to believe it. But not everyone was supportive. Later that afternoon, Mr. Dawson, the school principal, called him into his office. I heard you're considering a career change, Mr. Dawson said, his expression unreadable. Ben nodded. Yes, sir. I've been thinking about getting my teaching certification. Mr. Dawson sighed and leaned back in his chair. Look, Ben, you're great with the kids. But let's be realistic. Teaching requires years of study, lesson planning, and patience. It's not the same as chatting with students in the hallways. Ben clenched his fists. I know that, sir. And I'm willing to work for it. The principal shook his head. I just don't want you to get your hopes up. You're a great janitor, Ben. But maybe that's where you should stay. Ben left the office feeling defeated. Maybe Mr. Dawson was right. Maybe this was a foolish dream. But as he walked down the hallway, something happened. A group of kids saw him and rushed over. Mr. Ben, guess what? Jason grinned. I did my presentation today, and I wasn't even scared. Lily beamed. And I won a gold star for my writing. I wrote another story about you. Other kids chimed in, each one eager to tell him something good. And in that moment he knew he had already made a difference. And he wasn't about to stop now. That night, Ben enrolled in the night program. It wouldn't be easy. Balancing work and classes would be exhausting. But for the first time in years, he felt alive. He wasn't just cleaning floors. He was building a future. One where he wasn't just a janitor. One where he was a teacher. Ben's nights became longer, and his days even more exhausting. He worked full shifts at the school, cleaning classrooms, mopping hallways, and making sure everything was in order. But as soon as his shift ended, he rushed off to his night classes. He hadn't studied in years, and at first it was overwhelming. The assignments, the exams, the late nights, it all felt like too much. There were moments when he wanted to quit, when he thought maybe Mr. Dawson was right. But then, he'd see Lily and Jason in the hallways, waving at him. He'd hear kids calling his name, asking for advice, telling him their problems. And he'd remember why he started. So he pushed forward, one class at a time, one exam at a time. Months passed, and then a miracle happened. One evening, Ben was called into the superintendent's office. He had no idea what it was about. Was he in trouble? Was Mr. Dawson still against his plans? But when he walked in, Ms. Reynolds was there, smiling. And sitting beside her was a man in a suit, someone Ben had never seen before. Mr. Ben, the man said, standing up. My name is Mark Phillips. I'm with the State Department of Education. Ben swallowed. I wasn't expecting this. Mark chuckled. I imagine not. But Ben, we've been hearing a lot about you. From the teachers. From parents. From students. Your name keeps coming up in conversations about the school's most influential staff member. Ben's heart pounded. Mark continued. We recently launched a pilot program for alternative teacher certification. It's designed for individuals with experience working with students who may not have taken a traditional path to teaching. Ben's breath caught in his throat. We'd like to offer you a scholarship to fast-track your certification, Mark said. If you accept, you could be working as a teaching assistant by next semester and as a full-time teacher within a year. Ben felt like he couldn't breathe. He looked at Ms. Reynolds, who nodded encouragingly. You earned this, Ben, she said softly. And these kids need you. Tears welled in his eyes. For so long, he had believed that his life had no more meaning, that he was just a janitor, that he had missed his chance at something more. But now, the world was telling him, you are more. You always were. That night, Ben sat in his tiny apartment, staring at the acceptance letter. He thought about Emily, about how proud she would be. And then, he thought about Lily and Jason and all the kids at school, the ones who had unknowingly saved him. He smiled. Tomorrow, he would tell them the news. He wasn't just their janitor anymore. He was going to be their teacher.